Wuthering Waves 3.3 might be setting up its first real failure. Not a temporary setback, not a fake out, a moment where everything actually goes wrong. And the interesting part is, the livestream doesn't say that directly, it shows it through how the story is structured. For the first time, 3.3 isn't building towards a single linear conflict anymore. It's splitting everything into two fronts happening at the same time, and if either one of them fails, everything falls apart. So instead of focusing on the usual reactions and complaints, I want to break down what the livestream is actually setting up here. Because if this goes the way it's being built, 3.3 might end up very differently from what people are expecting. Obviously, the highlights of this livestream are Hiyuki and Denia, but before we get to them, we need to talk about the overall direction of the story in 3.3, because this is where things already start to look very different. Right now, everything is converging toward one point. We have the Trenodian looming over Lahai Roi, getting closer and closer to breaking through the Strider's Gate, and once that happens, that's it, there's no ambiguity there, everything gets wiped out. So naturally, the story is moving toward what feels like the inevitable confrontation, dealing with the Trenodian and trying to save Aemeath. That's the moment everyone's been waiting for. But what stood out to me in the livestream, it wasn't just what is happening, it's how they're choosing to present that conflict. Up until now, Wuthering Waves has handled its main conflict in a pretty linear way, even when other characters were doing things in the background, even when we had shifts in perspective, the core progression always moved forward in a straight line. 3.3 changes that. The first part of the story is split into two parallel missions. On one side you have Hiyuki holding back the Fractsidus, keeping them from interfering. On the other you have the protagonist going through the Strider's Gate into the void, trying to save Aemeath and confront the Trenodian directly. That immediately changes the shape of the conflict. This isn't just one problem being solved step by step anymore, it's two fronts happening at the same time, both critical, both interconnected. If they pull this off, it could make the story feel a lot more dynamic, more tension, more urgency, more room for things to go wrong. And honestly, that's the part that makes this exciting. This kind of structure opens the door for failure in a way the story didn't really lean into before. Now, of course, there's always the risk here. If this isn't handled properly, it can feel fragmented, like the story is split instead of expanded. But with how they've been handling things recently, especially since 3.1, I'm not too worried about that. If anything, this feels like a natural step forward. Now, that's just the structure. The livestream also gave us more insight into what Fractsidus are actually trying to do, and this is where things get a bit more interesting. Their goal is to replicate the assimilation within the Blessed Maiden, but the question is, where exactly does that happen? Up until now, it felt like everything was pointing towards Denia. That made sense, she's tied to Aleph 1, she's directly connected to everything that's happening. But then you look at how the Grand Architect treats her, and it doesn't line up. There's a clear disconnect there. The way they act towards Denia doesn't match someone who should be central to their plan. It feels dismissive, almost like she's replaceable. So now the question shifts, is Denia really the focus of that plan, or is it Aemeath? And if that's the case, then Denia's role becomes something else entirely. Even now, even with all the new information from the livestream, Denia doesn't become clearer, she becomes more mysterious. Every new piece of information just adds another layer instead of resolving anything. And to be fair, I think Wuthering Waves has been doing a really good job with that. They've been building her up slowly, consistently, turning her into something that feels like it's leading towards a much bigger reveal. But we'll get into that later. Before we talk about Denia, we need to talk about Hiyuki. Alongside Denia, Hiyuki has been one of the most mysterious characters in this entire arc. But unlike Denia, the 3.3 livestream actually gave us a lot to work with. Not everything, but enough to finally understand what kind of role she's meant to play. And the more you look at it, the more you realize she's not just another important character being introduced here, she's a very specific kind of piece in this story. The livestream makes one thing very clear from the start. Hiyuki is directly tied to Suzu, this fragment of power inherited from the Sentinel that she carries, and the important detail here is that she doesn't just use it, she hosts it. That already sets her apart, but what really defines her is the cost that comes with it. Every time she relies on that power, she burns through her own future, not metaphorically, literally. The more she uses it, the closer she gets to disappearing completely. And the key part is, she knows exactly what she's doing. This isn't something forced onto her, it's a choice. She chooses to carry that burden, she chooses to keep going even knowing where it leads, and that alone tells you what kind of character she is. But it also tells you what kind of role she's meant to play in 3.3. When you introduce a character like this, someone who acts as a vessel, someone who carries power at that kind of cost, someone who bears the wishes of others, you're not introducing them for a normal outcome. You're introducing them for a moment where everything else fails, and the livestream leans into that. Hiyuki isn't just presenting the story, she's positioned as support during one of the most critical moments. She's the one holding back the Fractsidus, making sure they don't interfere while everything else is happening on the other side. She's the one keeping the situation from collapsing completely, which brings us back to what we talked about earlier. She's not just a character in the story, she's a failsafe. The kind of character you don't use unless things go wrong. And that's what makes her so interesting, because it also changes how we look at her whole Miko identity. Before, I mostly look at it from a surface level. Her combat style, the whole swordswoman approach, the more familiar anime version of a shrine maiden, and yeah, that part is still there. But after everything we learn now, that's not really the important part. If we look at what she actually does in the story, she fits much closer to the core idea of a shrine maiden than it first seemed. She acts as a vessel, she carries something greater than herself, she takes on the wishes of others, and she pays for that role with her own future. That's not just aesthetic anymore, that's the foundation of the archetype. So even if her gameplay still leans into that more familiar direction, narratively, she aligns much more closely with what a shrine maiden is supposed to represent. And I think that's what makes her role in 3.3 so important, because she's not just powerful, she's built for a specific outcome, one where things don't go as planned. And if that's the direction the story is heading, then the real question isn't whether Hiyuki is going to matter, it's when she's going to be needed, and what is going to cost when that happens. Now let's talk about Denia. Unlike Hiyuki, the livestream didn't really give us answers for her. It did the exact opposite, it raised even more questions. At this point, that feels completely intentional. Denia isn't just presented as mysterious, she is the mystery. The more we see of her, the less clear things actually become. We still don't really understand her relationship with Fractsidus or with the Grand Architect. At times, it almost feels like they're operating on equal terms. And then the very next moment, she comes off as being in a clearly subordinate position. So which one is it? Is she an equal? Is she being controlled? Or is there something else going on entirely? The same uncertainty carries over into her role in the plan. On paper, Denia should be one of the most important characters in the entire story. She's Aleph 1's resonator. That alone should put her at the center of everything. But then you have moments where the Grand Architect treats her like she's not that important at all, almost dismissive. And that creates a really strange disconnect. If she is central to the plan, that attitude doesn't make sense. But then again, the Grand Architect has never really behaved like someone who's fully invested in whether the plan succeeds or fails in the first place, so maybe that's part of it. Or maybe Denia isn't as central as we think, or maybe she's something else entirely. And that's really the core of her character right now. Nothing about her is stable, not her role, not her position, not even her personality. Because every time we see her, she feels different. Sometimes calm, sometimes distant, sometimes almost detached, and then other times there's something else underneath, something harder to pin down. And it makes you wonder if that's something she can control, or something she's doing on purpose. Is she adapting depending on who she's talking to? Is she hiding something? Or is that duality just part of who she is? And this is exactly why she stands out so much. While Hiyuki feels like a character built around a clear purpose, Denia feels like a variable, an unknown, and that's what makes her role in the story so interesting, especially when you put her next to the Grand Architect. Up until now, the Grand Architect's plan has been strangely consistent. Even when we interfere, even when we win, it never really feels like they've lost. Their plan just keeps moving forward. It never truly breaks. So the real question is, can Denia be the one to break it? Could she be a character who disrupts that structure from the inside? Could she be manipulating more than she lets on? Even the Grand Architect? Now, realistically, that's probably not where this is going. But the way she's presented, the ambiguity, the shifting personality, the lack of clarity around her role, it leaves just enough room to wonder. And honestly, I think that possibility alone makes her one of the most interesting characters in this entire arc. Because right now, Denia isn't just part of the story, she's the one piece that doesn't quite fit. And depending on how that's resolved, she might end up being the one that changes everything. All in all, this livestream gave us a real clear look at what 3.3 is building toward, and more importantly, how it's choosing to get there. For the first time in a while, everything feels like it's converging. We're finally heading into the moment everyone has been waiting for, the confrontation with Aleph 1, the attempt to save Aemeath, the point where everything either comes together or completely falls apart. And the real question is, are we actually going to succeed, or is this where the story chooses to break? Once we start looking at everything that was set up here, it doesn't feel like a straightforward victory anymore. It feels like something is going to go wrong. How far does Hiyuki's power really go? When does it come into play? And if it does, what does it cost? And then there's Denia. Is she more than what we've seen so far? Or is she exactly what the story has been showing us? A character trapped within a role she didn't choose. A caged bird standing at the intersection between the path that was created for her and the one she might decide to take for herself. It's this kind of questions that create a very specific kind of space, the kind where a story doesn't just move forward, it hits. Everything here feels like it's building towards something that's not just big, but meaningful. Now, I know most of the conversation around this livestream has been focused on other things, but at least for me, that's never really been the point. When it comes to Wuthering Waves, what I care about is the story it's trying to tell, and right now, 3.3 looks like it might be setting up one of its strongest moments yet, and honestly, that's all I need. So yeah, if 3.3 lands the way it's being set up here, this might be one of those moments where Wuthering Waves really proves what kind of story it wants to be. Not just bigger, but better. And now I'm curious, what do you think? Do we actually save Aemeath? Or is this where everything falls apart? And more importantly, when Hiyuki finally steps in, is that going to be the solution or the cost? Let me know what you think down below. And if you enjoy breaking down stories like this, then stick around because 3.3 is definitely not going to be the end of the discussion.